Good evening. This is Jack from Charting the Markets, and this is the Bigger Picture webinar for the evening of Sunday, the 23rd of March. Now, disclaimer, I do this for educational purposes only. I'm here to share my technical analysis with you. I hope you can take some of what I'm doing, learn from it, transfer it to your own charts. I'm not here to issue trading signals. Right. Okay, last week I was talking about a week ago, I was talking about the moves we'd made below the 3SD lower band. I was talking about the rallies. I was talking about the minimum size in all probability of those rallies, and I was talking about that taking a few days. Doesn't need to be a couple of weeks. It needs to be a couple of weekly candles. But I'm thinking things have been developing. We've had, I'm just not starting the usual way because I've just got a point here to make it start. And we had a series of bottoming patterns here. They broke up, and I was leaning towards those making target. I'm now wondering about that. And unusually, I'm going to be looking at a Bitcoin chart, but the Bitcoin chart's illustrating a point. Okay, on Bitcoin, we had an inverted head and shoulders. It broke up, and it hasn't failed. I haven't got the target marked in here. I think I have it on the next chart along. Yeah, the target's at 92,000. But you can see that at the same time that we've been forming, formed this IHS, we've also been forming a bear flag. Now, I think that bear flag is likely the real thing we're looking at here. On Bitcoin, and I'm thinking this might well be the case on equities as well. So here I've drawn in a couple of trend lines. I was looking at this this morning, and I was thinking the obvious thing to do here, because I'd drawn this in before this touched the third time down here. We already had 3 touches above, and I was thinking the obvious thing to do was see another leg up, and we are seeing on the futures charts the start of that other leg up. Now, I'd be expecting that to go a while further, but I wouldn't expect it to make the IHS target, and then I would expect it to break down maybe Tuesday, Wednesday next week. We shall see. So, looking at that, what does that look like here? Well, on ES, we've got a breakup from a double bottom. We've got a nice looking target up here in the 5870 area to the 5900 area, but there's a distinct possibility we're not going to make it. We're running into extra time here. We did have 2 weeks a day to deliver this rally. We've now got 1 week and a day. On April the 2nd, which I think is a Tuesday, if I'm not much mistaken. Hang on, wait a second. Nope, it's Wednesday. But basically, on April the 2nd, a whole load of tariffs are going in. Now, that's a plan that's evolving, but I think I've been looking very carefully at what Trump's been saying about this. He seems really, really keen on this idea. Very keen. And I'm looking at the nice-looking 3-touch trend line here on resistance here. Actually, that should be a thicker line, actually. I think what we're looking at here may well be the bear flag that ES is forming before we go down. Now we can see an overthrow to the upside. With any luck, we would see a 60-minute sell signal. But I think there's got a distinct possibility that we're going to form flags here and then break down early. And that breakdown will be sometime next week. Because I think, well, I'm going to be doing a post. I'm going to be talking about tariffs. That'll probably be later in the week. But I mean, the fact is, from an economic point of view, tariffs are not going to be good. And there's a gamut of things that can happen on tariffs that run from bad to really, really, really bad. So especially if this is an experiment which goes on for several months, it's going to be against most of the US's traditional allies and biggest trading partner, who tend to be your allies, of course. And it seems to have started off with the assumption that the US would put on tariffs. There wouldn't be any retaliation, but if anyone dared to retaliate, then there would be further, larger tariffs. But I think the problem is, I think most of them are going to retaliate. I think Canada's already been retaliating, and obviously Europe's been retaliating, and the retaliations will be tit for tat. And then if there's a whole load of what Trump is calling retaliatory tariffs to those retaliatory tariffs, then of course that's likely to bounce things up. That's not likely to do anything for growth. Trade, we're seeing, I think the US was probably going into recession anyway, but I think the increasing uncertainty and the talk of tariffs is going to make that deeper. And I'm very reminded that historically, and I know Trump hasn't read this because I don't think he reads a great deal, but I mean, historically, you had the 29 crash, and then you had a recession after that, which was a deep one. And then you had Herbert Hoover putting a whole load of tariffs in 1930, and then you had the Great Depression. And that was one of the key reasons that people gave for the Great Depression. So, really, we might have a pretty ugly year while this tariff experiment runs on. And the closer we get to April the 2nd, without basically that date being put back or talk of maybe it's a bad idea, then the more gravity there is going to be on the markets. So I've drawn in a possible bear flag option here. That would have a target up. I think that might be a little light. Maybe it goes higher. There are other potential options. There's another one here, for instance. But I think one way or another, we're likely to be seeing more declines. Now, the first target, of course, on a bear flag, if I'm right, would be just a retest of the low. That would get us down to 55.50, a couple hundred points. And that could be it, and we could start a larger rally then, particularly. But I think the bear flags are likely to take us back into a retest of the lows. And then if this tariff thing's really happening, well, we've got a whole load of targets below that. Okay, we'll be having a look at those, but let's go through the futures first. NQ. Not a really obvious flag here. I've drawn one in on the Q's chart, but this would be the support trend line for the flag. I had a couple of options for the resistance trend line, but the nicest looking one on the futures is actually the ES one. Okay, looking at RTY, decent-ish option here for a resistance trend line, but mainly we've got the support trend lines in all probability, and then we're looking at another leg up, which has obviously started so far this week, and I'm expecting to see some continuation higher and likely higher highs across the board for the current rally highs. I'm not sure how much further it's going to get than that. YM, again, we've got nice reversal patterns on here, and to be honest, none of those have failed. This one came very close, but it didn't fail. But I am very much thinking the gravity might just take this down before we get there. On DAX, we've actually got a 60-minute buy signal fixed. On ESTX, we've got a 60-minute buy signal fixed. So again, that was leaning into a rally, and likely we are going to see that rally. So let's have a look at the bigger picture charts. Okay, looking at SPX, I've drawn in, I was wondering if we'd go lower and get to this flag. It looks like that we're not going to. So I would redraw this support trend line here. It's provisional. Obviously, we'll see what happens. It happens overnight and into the morning tomorrow. I've drawn in an obvious potential resistance trend line there. It's not a good match with the one I've drawn in on ES, but at the moment we're still waiting for things to develop, and I think things will come clearer as we get there. Here, if we were to hit this trend line, we would actually potentially make the IHS the double bottom target. I'm a bit skeptical about that happening, to be honest, but we will see. All right, looking at this means that we're probably not going to get close to the daily middle band. I've got that up in the 5750 area, but potentially. We've got the 200 DMA also at the 5750 area, so it isn't a very attractive target if it can be made. So that's a possibility for tomorrow. And that would be the obvious place to fail if we're going to. We've got an RSI 5 buy signal fixed here on the daily, which I don't think is going to make target on this run. We've still got some open 60-minute buy signals which can make target. Qs, we're further away from the well, I don't know. I mean, this hasn't rallied as much, but actually the daily middle band has been falling faster. We've got a potential of hitting it. Of course, that too is crossing the 200 DMA, so that would be an obvious resistance if we get there tomorrow. Hourly chart, we've still got a buy signal here, and I think that may well make target tomorrow. On the 15-minute, I didn't really have an obvious resistance trend line, but I've drawn in the support trend line here, and we'll see how that develops. Again, I'm skeptical about this double bottom making the target, but potentially if we have a strong day. One thing to mention, actually, I was a bit surprised to see that we have a huge volume spike on Friday, which was unexpected. Apex, possibly, but I mean, but it wasn't this. I wasn't really expecting to see that. We've got this huge volume spike. Does this look like a turn? Well, it's not really close to the bottom. could be close to the top of the rally. I don't think it's necessarily significant, but I did wonder about it. Looking at Dire, again, we're not too far away from the daily middle band. That is potentially a target. Hourly chart, we've got has reached the possible near miss target anyway, but may well reach the full target. And here, I've got a couple of possible resistance trend lines here, which for a couple of decent looking rising wedges, and I'm going to see if it hits either of those. Okay, let's have a look at IWM. IWM, I put in a support trend line, a couple of decent options here, although this has been weak. I don't know. I mean, I think they should make a high over 207.68, and this was pretty close to the target for that pattern anyway. Looking at IWM 60-minute, this does kind of look like an inverted head and shoulders. That could break up, and obviously a lot of these break up, fail shortly after they break up, and we're already testing the daily middle band on this, so I'll be watching that closely tomorrow. Looking at DAX, DAX, we're still on an RSI 14 and an RSI 5 sell signal on the daily chart. Nice looking potential double top, and that could be a double top. Look at the holes on Nikkei. We've got back above the daily middle band, and we're still back testing it here. We've got with the RSI 5 buy signal made target, and the RSI 14 buy signal is a weak one and hasn't made target yet. And I'm thinking probably won't make target on this run. Okay, let's have a look at right. Right, so we'll see on that. Let's have a look at the targets below. All right, let's have a look at SPX. The targets which I'd be thinking, if we could just retest the lows on the next move down, but if we don't just do that, then I'd be looking for the current pattern targets to get made. We'd need to drop another 100 handles on SPX to make the minimum target here, and the another 60 handles also to make the maximum target. So there's significant further potential downside here. What I'm thinking may be the ultimate target here, if we go directly into another leg down, is the full retracement of this rising wedge back to the 51.19 area. Let's have a look at that on the daily chart, and you can see that's actually almost exactly the 50% retracement of this move up from October 2023. And that's a really, really nice Fibonacci target. So if we see another leg down, that's where I'll be watching. If we see a complete disaster this year, I'd be watching that and then looking for a bounce there, maybe to get back into ideally the 5700 area, and then potentially we start going back into much lower levels, with the target down here in the 4100 area. Okay, let's have a look at, I don't want to sound too dramatic here, but I think this tariff thing is really not going to be good for business. And it's not going to be good for the market because it's not good for business. So we'll see. Okay, looking at Qs, we're pretty close to those targets already. If we get down to the 455 to 460 area, that would fill these targets. Is there an obvious target below? Yes. I've got a very big potential head and shoulder neckline here and a slightly smaller one here, and I've got that basically at 422 and 411. Those are the if we go through these targets and go significantly below them, those are the areas I'd be looking at. On Dire, Dire, this one broke down last and is back testing obviously the double top support in effect at the moment. This has got a target down in the 384 area, and that pretty much is the target area. I've got a head and shoulder patterned possible neckline here at about 380, got another one here at 375, and we've got another one here at 370. I'd be looking really for one of those potentially, because even if we are going to see a big decline on equities this year, normally we'd still see patterns, we'd still see things don't necessarily go down in a straight line, and then generally almost always don't go down in a straight line. So I'd be looking for patterns to form, and I'm looking for the obvious support levels where we might see a rally. Okay, let's have a look at IWM. On the daily chart there, we've got a target which is actually significantly lower relative to the November 2023 low, because this one turned first. And actually the target here, which I've got down in about the 183 area, would actually be well below the 61.8. Here, could we see an extension all the way down there? I don't know. IWM is rather different from the others. If we see a move down to the November 2023 low, well, that's a low which really held from 20. It was basically a low area which held between 22 and late 23. I'm skeptical about it getting much lower than that. Is there potential to? Yeah, sure. But that's a big, big support level. This is that's the 50% level of the move up from the 2000 low. It looks obviously a little less scary on the monthly chart, but it's still a big, big level. That would be a very obvious level to find support. Could it be a double top support? Yes, but it's too large a double top for me to think that there's been much chance of it making target. But we will see. All right, great. In that case, let's move on. Let's move on to the dollar. Okay, dollar. I really like this double bottom. It's been a slow developer. It's not very big, but I have to say the support for it is pretty good, and it's now starting to break up with a target in the 104.75 area. More to say about this on the daily chart. ZB, we broke up from this flag. It's a nice flag. Now we could be forming a larger flag potentially, and see another lower low. But ultimately, one way or another, I'm expecting to see this high here at 119.17 retested. So waiting to see that. All right, let's have a look at those on the bigger picture charts. Now, on the much bigger picture on US dollar, you can see this is the really big picture, and this shows you where we are, looking back at the last, 40 years on the dollar. Now, we've got this big high here. It's actually taken the room. The data used to go back up to here, and they've taken that off. But anyway, we had this big high here up in about the 122 area, and you can see the Fibonacci. Well, you can see the lines here about where. That's all right. It's anyway. I'm going to dig up a historic chart for the next move. But we had a Plaza Accord in 1985, was an international agreement to devalue the dollar, and that's where this data used to start. But they seem to have clipped off a bit here, which is a shame because that was the start of this, and it was a lot higher. But in terms of the Plaza Accord, this all could be a double bottom, and we're getting pretty close to resistance. But we've got a lot of resistance here. We've got a rising megaphone rising from the low, and after we made this high here and set up this really nice trend line, I've been looking since then for a move down to this target here in the 97 area, and I think the evidence suggests that we are forming a bull flag, which could while it was forming, get us down to the test of this trend line and potentially either break down there or, because it's a flag, more likely break up towards a retest of this high here in the 114 area. What are we looking at in the short term? Weak RSI 14 buy signal fixed, RSI 5 buy signal fixed on the daily. I'm really liking that little double bottom. To be honest, it's a very small double bottom. I marked it in on here, but nonetheless, it's looking pretty good. And I think there's a very good chance it's going to reach that target. When it does, it's going to be testing maybe slightly above the daily middle band, which is obviously a key resistance area on what is likely a leg down. But if this channel is right, then we could be heading up to test this channel resistance, currently in the 105.75 area, but dropping fairly rapidly. All right, TNX on the bigger picture. Again, we've got a flag. It's broken up. We could form a larger flag, but really, we've got a date with 49.97, and I think it's very likely we're going to see that in the next few months. Now, we saw a nice move up. We've been seeing a pullback. Does it look like a flag? It's not a nice flag, certainly. But I'm thinking overall, this is probably likely to develop into a flag. Could this be, could we go lower? Yes. Could this be a bear flag forming? Taking us up potentially to this trend line here, which is currently in about the 44.5 area. Yes, and I'm keeping an open mind because I don't have a clear pattern here. But ultimately, I'm expecting this to resolve into a retest of this high here at 49.97, which is what you would very much generally get. I've drawn in some other trend lines here, potential triangles, where certainly this is going to be a wild year. We've got the tariffs, then we've got the tax increases here. We're probably going to have a government shutdown later in the year. This is going to be an interesting year altogether. What we could do here is we could see a recession starting here, and a recession is likely starting here. That's likely to depress inflation, and that could take TNX down. But then the tax cuts and government shutdown could actually cause a bond market crisis, which could really then send bond prices up. Bonds are unlikely to be a big safe haven this year, I think. We shall see. All right, let's have a look at oil. Oil, this looks like, again, we've got this thing of a double bottom. It's broken up, but I'm wondering whether a flag is forming. Overall, on the bigger picture, I've got this falling megaphone here, which is looking pretty nice. If we were to hit the, this could be, if this is a megaphone, this would be an underthrow, and we'd probably be breaking up here, but I'm wondering whether we're setting up a flag to go back and retest the low. While we were retesting that low, we could retest the main low, which is at 63.57, and I'm thinking that's definitely one of the things I'm thinking may happen here. I'd like to see a double bottom form at that test and then break up. But again, we're going to have a pretty wild year on oil, I would have thought, especially with things that might be happening in Russia if the Europeans shut down the shadow oil fleet. Which they're looking at doing now, and could obviously most of Russia has still been exporting a lot of oil, but it's been going mainly through the shadow fleet. If that gets shut down, then of course that's going to be an oil shock, which takes quite a lot of oil off the market. That could send prices up. We will see. NG, I've got a potential bull flag here. It's not a bad one. We've got a little double bottom here, a little double bottom break up over 4.1. We could see a move back up into 4.3 area, and that could break this up and potentially take us back up into a retest of this high. Let's have a look at that in oil on the bigger picture charts. Okay, CL. On oil, we've got nothing particularly clear, but we've got a very obvious target, declining resistance target, which I'm wondering about, the 69.25 area. Looking at WTIC, I think this is all part of a large overall falling wedge, and I think that falling wedge resistance is currently in about the 63.57 area. I think this is setting up the retest of that low, which is this low here, and then falling wedges being a bullish pattern. If we find some support there, then we've got a potential double bottom, and we've got a potential setup for a breakup, and certainly there is scope, even with a recession in the US and possibly much of the rest of the world, for prices to go up. Alternatively, we could find this falling wedge breaks down. They don't usually do that, but they do sometimes do that. I reckon about 30% of the time. Okay, so looking at the bigger picture on that, this all looks like a double bottom forming, but there's a lot of geopolitical risk here. We will see. All right, natural gas. Natural gas in the short term, I'm wondering about a double top here. No decent sell signal here, but I'm wondering if we might see some more retracement. I'm looking at this rising wedge. It's not great. Part of a rising megaphone. I'm wondering if we might possibly... It would be a big move down here, and I'm not really expecting it, but I've drawn it in because it is something to consider here, and we do have this nice-looking potential level top, although I'd note the last one broke down and fell pretty rapidly. Looking at natural gas on the bigger picture, this is a double bottom. It's broken up. It's got a target in the 5.75 to 6.25 area, and 5.75 is a particularly attractive target because it's a 50% retracement of this move down from 10 to 1.6. So I'm thinking this may well make that target, and I like it. I have understood, as we on the weekly chart, we're sort of converting the 200-week moving average at the moment to support, but I do understand that there may be a cold snap at the end of March, which could drive prices up. But really, this is a nice pattern setup, and we've not seen anything convincing so far to say this is going to fail. Could it fail? Yes. If it does fail, do I have a possible RSI 5 sell signal brewing on the monthly? Yes, I do. But it's a nice looking setup, and I think it's got a decent chance of making target. We will see how that goes. All right, let's have a look at GC. Now, gold's been making higher highs again. We've got a tiny little head and shoulders here, which has broken down and has almost made target. We had a sell signal that's made target. Could we be looking at a sizable high here? Well, we'll look at the daily chart, but this as a topping pattern is tiny. If we're going to see a decent topping pattern, it's going to be larger, maybe a head and shoulders with a neckline in about the 29.90 area. Looking at SI, we've broken down slightly below this rising support. We've got a double top here, and it's now open to make that target, which I've got in about the 32.9 to 33 to the 33 area. We've got a 60-minute buy signal fixed here. That's been responding a bit. Waiting to see. I would say there is a very interesting looking potential level top here. I'm not saying that's going to deliver, but but I'm wondering about it. Looking at HG, we went higher, and I've been talking about a target in the 5.2 area. Let's have a look at that now. Okay, looking at metals. Okay, on copper, let's look at that first. We were looking at that last. We've still got an RSI 14 sell signal fixed on the daily. That's really not delivered anything. I've got a potential trend line here, which I'm wondering about. But that trend line has got room, really, to get us up into the main target on copper. And that would be the retest of this high here, the all-time high, I think. But certainly, this is the highest high we've seen since 1980. By a long way, and it's likely the all-time high. So I've been leaning towards this being retested. That could set up a little double top here, and that could then deliver. If we're going into recessions, then obviously it's called Dr. Copper because it tends to be responsive to economic growth. So we may see the start of a large decline, but it would set up a very nice looking double top if this would go back and retest this, maybe go a little higher, and I think we're about to see that retest. So this is a 5.2 high. This is us coming back to retest it. I'm thinking we're going to retest it, and it may be that not long after that we see a very significant reversal, because copper, of course, is very much an industrial metal. Okay, looking at the others on gold, we've got a possible trend line here. Not the best, not the worst. Do we have any sell signals here? Yeah, I've got a gold daily sell signal that hasn't failed here. We don't have anything on the RSI 5, but if we saw a retest of this high, we would have a possible RSI 5 daily sell signal brewing. I am wondering whether we might see a bit of a reversal here. Looking at the bigger picture, we're through all the bigger picture trend lines. So we're in uncharted territory, but if we are going to see a decent retrace, then 3,000 is not a bad place psychologically to be seeing that from, and I'm wondering about it. Looking at silver, I've got a couple of charts here. This is one target I've got in the 38 area, and it's a nice one, but the trend line goes all the way back to 2008, so it doesn't show on my smaller charts. So if you're wondering why this isn't shown on my smaller charts, that's the reason. On the weekly chart, this is a trend line that goes back to even 2013. I mean, these patterns do tend to play out over long periods. I'm wondering about this trend line here. That would have resistance in about 36 area, and I'd quite like to see that made. Looking at the daily chart, we've got a weak RSI 5 sell signal fixed. That's been playing out, but that's pretty close to the possible near miss target, and we are testing already the daily middle band. All right, palladium. We've got a potential kind of double bottom here. Really, it would look better if it went a bit lower. Has this been doing anything significant, really? And the answer is, on the bigger picture, no. I'm going to be running up the much bigger picture charts as well. I'm working up on a lot of these, the continuous charts. I'm working up the monthlies. Haven't got that yet, but on this picture, I'm really wondering about a retest of this low here at 808. We got pretty close to it, but I'm wondering whether we might need to see that to set up a decent looking double bottom. However, could this be an inverted head and shoulders? Yes, it could, and that wouldn't be bad either. But either way, we don't really have anything solid at the moment, and we don't have much in terms of signals, and we've just been really trapped in this on the bigger picture, very narrow range. On platinum, again, while gold's been going up, I've been leaning towards this heading higher, and we've not really seen that yet. This has been a bit more interesting. But again, I'm going to be working up some monthly charts on these, and I've already been doing that on the soft commodities, which we'll be going to shortly. Okay, RSI 14 sell signals reached possible near miss target. No real divergence here, but I am wondering about a move up into a retest of this high here. Sorry, this trend line here in the 1070 area. Okay, let's have a look at GDX, where we have made higher highs. I was expecting these, and we've got them. And on GDXJ, we've seen them as well. Again, I'm going to be working up the longer term charts here to be having a look at that. I wasn't really covering those at Arctic chart for a while, but I think it's time to resurrect those and deepen what I'm looking at here. In the shorter term, no divergence, possible little rising megaphone here, possible little rising megaphone here too on GDXJ, and this is a pretty nice one. I'm wondering about these, seeing some retracement here. We shall see. All right, let's have a look at nothing really much to see on the currencies here. Nice looking level top here, which is just the mirror of the one on DX. Not really an awful lot else to see. Looking at KC, Wondering about a bigger flag here. This is very, very, very overbought by historical standards. I'll be showing you why that is on the monthly chart shortly, but I'm thinking we may well see a retest of this high to set up the second high of a double top, and if we're forming a flag here, then the obvious next step would be a move down into about 355 area. We'll see whether we get it. SB, wondering about a full hit of the target here at the inverted shoulder target in about the 20.35 area. Haven't quite made it yet. This might be close enough for government work. We will see. But this looks like a little bull flag forming at the moment, and I'm wondering if it could possibly be nice enough to make that target. CC, again, very overvalued by historical standards. Wondering about a little double bottom here and a rally. We'll see whether we get it on wheat. This looked like a flag which is breaking down. This may be heading back into a retested low here in about the 530 area. On corn, could be an overall flag here. Not really that clear on what's happening here at the moment. We will see. More to say about these on the bigger picture charts. On soy, this looks like a triangle here. If this is a triangle, it's a bearish triangle, and we'll be setting up a retest of this low here in about the 990 area. Looking at CT, little head and shoulders here is broken down and made target. No current divergence. More to say about all of these on the daily charts, apart from live cattle and lean hogs, where I haven't been able to manage to get a continuous chart out of stock charts. On lumber, we've got a possible test of the retest of this high coming. I think there may well be a second high of a double top if we get it. On live cattle, we've moved up. We've got a nice wedge here, and that's broken down slightly. I think we might be topping out for a retracement. On lean hogs, we've got a nice little move up, and then we've been consolidating. I'm leaning towards a possible breakup here, but we could see a breakdown into a retest of this low here in the 91.875 area. Okay, let's have a look at the soft bigger picture charts. I've not finished on these, but I've done a few of them. On coffee, I wanted to show you how overvalued this is by historical standards. This is a big, big, big high. This is going back 50 years. And this is a very big high. I'm wondering if we're topping out here, but if we get a retest of the high here, we could see negative divergence on the RSI, the monthly RSI 14 and RSI 5. I'd love to see that. On the hourly chart, on the weekly charts, again, if we see retest the high, we could see some really nice negative divergence. I'm hoping to see that. We've seen a breakdown below the current rising megaphone. I'm thinking that opens the way to go a bit lower. We can set up a nice bull flag, go back and retest the high, and set up a double top. That's what I'd like to see. We'll see if I get it. We don't have, well, we've got a weak RSI 14 cell signal fixed. I've not been paying a great deal of attention to it, but that's still there, and we're struggling at the daily middle band at the moment and trying to convert it back to support. Okay, looking at sugar on the bigger picture, we're neither particularly overvalued or undervalued here. So let's actually run that back a little further. Hang on, wait a second. Right, 50 years. All right, go back a lot further. Sugar used to be a lot more expensive, but really the world changed. This is going back to 80s. We haven't seen anything like these prices in a very, very long time. Lovely, lovely head and shoulder pattern. Just note that really was nice, and it made target beautifully. What are we doing on the bigger picture here? I think we are just kicking around uncertainly, possibly building up a double bottom. If so, I'd really be looking for a retest of this low, which would involve a big, big decline. Now, I would say I've got a nice looking head and shoulders here. I am wondering if we might see a big decline. I don't know what the crops are saying about that, but if so, that would have a pretty obvious target to retest this low here, which is all the way down at actually no, here this one's slightly lower in the 440 area. Now we had a little double bottom here, and it broke up and it made target. I'm wondering if we're setting up a larger double bottom. Okay, looking at the daily chart, we've got nothing really in the way of divergence. I am just wondering if we're going to see a breakdown. On the bigger picture, you've seen that obviously this is the right shoulder on a potential head and shoulders, and I'm wondering if that's going to play out. Okay, cocoa. This is the historical chart. Again, I'll run that back. Hang on, wait a second. Let's have a look at that over 50 years. Pretty wild, huh? This was a massive, massive high by historical standards, and we've already got the potential double top. Do we have any divergence here? Yes, this is a monthly RSI 14 sell signal that's fixed, and we don't have one on the RSI 5. Do I think there's a lot of potential downside here? Yes, we've got a potential double top here, but as the target is in the 0 area, I'm not thinking that's going to make target, but we've got a lot of potential downside to come. And I think this cocoa would be a brave long looking at this. We could still see a retest this high though, but it doesn't really need one. We've already got a nice looking double top, albeit one that's way too large. I'm thinking we might see a bit of a rally here, but we don't need to. And actually, we're touching declining resistance at the moment. We could go down directly from here. I think there is potentially a lot of downside on cocoa. All right, looking at wheat on the bigger picture chart, we reached a pretty big high here. We've come well back from it. What's happening on the shorter term? I'm not entirely certain, but I am wondering if we might see a retest. If we're going to go higher, I'm wondering if we might see a retest this low here at 495.50 first. All of these are liable to be negatively affected by tariffs, I think. Although, to be honest, it's been so long since there's been a big tariff war, it's hard to say. All right, looking at corn, again, by historical standards, not at hugely high levels. On the smaller picture, I've got possible channel breaking down here. I am wondering about more downside here. Looking at soybeans, soybeans on the monthly chart, we hit some very big numbers here on the, and we've come back a long way from those, which is fine. In terms of the monthly chart, have we got a buy signal here? Yeah, I've got a weakish RSI 5 buy signal there on the monthly chart. On the daily chart, I'm looking for a bottoming pattern here. And I'm wondering if we're going to need to see a retest this low here at 955.40 before we get that. Looking at cotton, not at big numbers here. Nothing really suggesting we've got a possible RSI 5 buy signal bring on the monthly. I'm not convinced there's a big move up coming here. Daily chart, unfortunately, I'm working on a lousy daily chart here. I'll have a weekly ready for next week, but this isn't an awful lot to be working with. No current divergence though, no obvious pattern, but I am wondering about a retest this low here at 58.38. Okay, looking at lumber. Lumber, obviously we had these huge highs after COVID, and we've come down a long way from those. I am wondering if we are forming a bear flag on the bigger picture to go lower, and that could take us higher, although potentially we've already made the higher high that could make that already. On the smaller picture, this is a potential wedge, and I'm wondering if this is breaking up. This could get interesting, because one thing I've noted when wedges break up before is they establish support at the resistance trend line and they go higher. I'm wondering if it's doing that, but we could just be forming a double top. I've been leaning towards seeing a retest this high here at 677.05, and if we see a test of that and then a breakdown, this could be a double top, which could take us considerably lower. We shall see. All right, great. Just to recap on ES, I'm thinking we may be looking at bear flags forming here rather than the initial patterns I was looking at. This is all looking very, very heavy, and I have to say crypto and equities do tend to move together. Not always, but a lot of the time. And what we're seeing here is exactly the same thing on Bitcoin. We had a double bottom, it broke up, and then it's forming what is pretty obviously looking like a flag, a bear flag. I'm thinking we may well see higher highs here, not make these pattern targets, and then find a high middle of next week, let's say, and then go down. That would satisfy what I was talking about a week ago in terms of the the couple of weeks slightly short, but I'm not sure. A couple of those examples may only have lasted about 9 or 10 days. And I'm wondering if this is going to be one of them. I've drawn in a couple of trend lines here. I'll be keeping an open mind on it. I'll have more for you on Wednesday, and I'll obviously be covering this on a daily basis in the pre-market webinars, where I'm going to be looking at these patterns as they evolve. Nothing new, obviously, likely to be seen by tomorrow morning, but there'll be a lot more on Tuesday and Wednesday. So if you're interested in that, check in on those. All right, great. In that case, everyone take care, and I'll see you again on Wednesday night.